Hello ladies and gentlemen, I've returned from my illness to create a topic video after like a month of depressing content. I'm going to preemptively celebrate the new batch of free 5 stars coming soon in Starrail by talking about the best free limited 5 stars HSR has ever done. The fact that there's more than 5 that I can even talk about and make a list out of is actually very impressive for a gacha game. Rules are that I cannot include the MC path, 50/50 loss units, companion shop, and standard units. The only units eligible for this list are 5 stars that are still classified as limited in that they were given for free at some point with no currency required. This will be judging the unit at the time of their release, their longevity, and the various factors that affected their viability. With that out of the way, let's get on to the video. Number 5 is coincidentally the first free 5-star unit, Dr. Ratio. Dr. Ratio released in 1.6 and right out of the box was free. Numbers wise, Dr. Ratio was one of the best in single target, if not the best. Unlike many units at the time, he was one of the few 5 stars that had a limited 5 star so tailor-made for his role in the name of Topaz. His Eidolons are one of, if not the best from the 1.x roster, and due to this, a high investment ratio held up his end of the bargain compared to the others of his era. He was a very early example of a unit that actually scaled pretty well with cost, though obviously not as good as modern standard. And due to being a follow-up attack unit, he had some sneaky advantages that prevented damage overkill that DPSs like Imbiber to Lune and Jingliu can really struggle from. He also had advantages being imaginary weakness, since enemies would start becoming more commonly weak to it and not many units were imaginary around the time, allowing the player base to have an easy answer when weakness types used to mean everything. Of course, Dr. Ratio wasn't the best free 5-star for a number of reasons that mirror his advantages. Dr. Ratio's outright replacement came out in the name of Fei Xiao, who stole many of his team members and offered much better results for less effort. After Fei Xiao, the HP spike left many characters like Dr. Ratio in a much worse place. He was still usable, but he was really struggling much more. Nowadays, without a Nova Flare, and even with support units like Cypher coming out, Dr. Ratio is lost in the shuffle as one of the worst limited 5 stars. Even before all of that happened, Acheron would have teams that are so similar that investing into Acheron may mean that you're making Dr. Ratio weaker. For how popular and broken Acheron was, this was a very easy decision to just abandon Dr. Ratio. And I think the most important part is that while Dr. Ratio was a top damage dealer around his era, the era of 1.x and the first half of 2.x was very generous. Dr. Ratio can claim he's the best DPS, and yeah, he did have a really good argument, but the only game modes back then were MOC and Pure Fiction. MOC did not have high enough HP spikes that even main DPS 4 stars were viable without that much effort. So with all the strength that Dr. Ratio has, the era itself had very few need for it. Later on, when the HP actually started seriously spiking, he was replaced by Fei Xiao and Acheron already. He was broken in a time where you just didn't really need to be, and as new broken units poured in, he became just okay when the difficulty spikes actually hit. Nevertheless, there's been revisionist history that Dr. Ratio was never that good, and that's just straight up false. Dr. Ratio had some issues, but when he was given for free, Dr. Ratio was an absolute bargain, and he was broken as a zero cycling king with one of the strongest verticals for more dedicated users around the time, and he did get team updates. He wasn't the best anymore, but you could keep him afloat if you really wanted to. It's just a shame that he was balanced in the early days of Starrail, when the philosophy of units and their power expectations would drastically shift in less than a year. The next best free limited 5-star is Archer. Archer was given for free on the Fate collab release in 3.4 and his kit immediately jumped out. He was a ridiculously simple skill spammer that had strong damage control tools to handle AoE. His numbers were also flat out ridiculous to list down. In my analysis before his release, I was flabbergasted that Archer was going to be the free unit and he did not disappoint at all. Archer's broken kit was so absurd, he managed to revive Sparkle who was having a hard time trying to beat Sunday. This was the one case she finally had an outright best in slot, as even even Imbiber to Lune was being snatched by Sunday. And unlike Dr. Ratio, Archer had a difficulty spike come his way and came out its strongest survivor. Archer is one of the few king clears and anomaly arbitration, the first one, that used really dirt cheap investment. He would continue to keep up with anomaly arbitration with shockingly low investment on kings and knight stages. His team structure was the utter nightmare of the cost system due to free limited units synergizing with him so well. Not to mention, because Archer didn't have a real third slot, he would use cheap options like RMC and Pela and end up fine. His closest replacement came in the form of Sparksy in 4.0, but Archer had his own matchups where Sparksy genuinely just lost. Zila's Nova Flare in 4.2 was direct competition with Archer, and team overlap being a major concern, but Zila is much more matchup dependent than Archer, and Zila has always been a unit that's for more dedicated mains in the first place. Archer started being an E1 merchant after 4.1's difficulty spike in anomaly arbitration, but we already know a second copy is going to be free in the next collab, so that doesn't even matter, I guess. Of course, as much as I am an Archer glazer, I would have loved to give him the top 1, but I can't say it in good conscience. Don't worry, it's not because it's Archer's fault, really. Though Archer was an incredible free option, he was still a DPS at the end of the day. Let me explain. There are units later on in this list that are needed for an archetype to even function, or in some extreme cases, an account needs them to even function at all. Archer is a DPS, and the only time he felt like an actual requirement to use is if you had Sparkle, since she was a low demand everywhere else during 3.4, until Sparkle got her Nova Flare, of course. Even then, Sparkle wasn't unusable and had fine on teams, she was just weaker than Sunday. And after Nova Flare, Sparkle had a lot more DPSs that you may skip out on using Archer and won't feel a noticeable difference. All this to say that Archer is a normal DPS that has a strong team who doesn't really need him to properly function. Unlike, let's say, a Cerebra team whose value is deathly reliant on a few DPS options. But overall, Archer is the best free DPS StarRail has ever given. He was executed much better than Dr. Ratio, due in part of the devs being completely unbiased, I'm sure. He was released before a huge power spike and came out a winner. He was continuously updated to let him keep up, and due to the most of the upgrades being free, Archer is the greatest cost scamming DPS this game has ever seen, and probably will ever see. And his only mistake was being a unit that isn't oppressing the meta at all, and the innate limitations as a DPS in how valuable they are to an account. Archer is proof that if you're free, that is never a condition to be a mid unit in StarRail. I feel really bad for any future character because they will always be in the shadow of what Archer did to this game. The next unit is heng permansor terra, or let's just call him Peter for short because I'm gonna get an aneurysm if I keep saying that. Peter was given for free on his debut at 3.6, which featured Anomaly Arbitration's debut. He is a shielder that benefits off attack scaling teams with extra synergy in the form of a summon that acts multiple times for defense and attack frequency. His defense is fairly good too, not the best and not exactly universal, but he compensated enough with his toolset for it to be a non-issue most of, if not all the time. Speaking of which, Peter has a great toolset to help the party. Attack frequency for mechanics, some AoE damage for hunt units, and more niche-wise, he has a summon for Sunday's damage boost. Peter oftentimes can help naturally in a team like DOT, or when AoE checks like Reaver try to block out units like Archer, he really helps with Archer too. He just does a lot of useful things well enough. Because Peter released on 3.6, he was already balanced with Anomaly Arbitration in mind. Besides Hyacinth, the other sustained simply weren't contributing enough in terms of damage that the new endgame would otherwise be hell without Hyacinth. The rising attack inflation, small amount of debuffs, and need for attack frequency for breaking and war armor mechanics made Peter very useful without compromising your safety. Of course, just like any other sustain, he's worse than a support, but he helped close the gap to a great degree for these teams. Even now, in Anomaly Arbitration, Peter is still doing work because Hoyo refused to release a new sustain design, and just like any other sustain, the DPS that use him did evolve and still find him very good to this day. But there is a reason why I don't rank PT in top 1. The ever-present problem being a sustain, even a free premium one, is that there is not a singular team that outright wants it if they could help it. The only exception is Hyacinth, who turns healing into damage and is not distinguishable from a sustainless team even at high high investment. With this in mind, the HPT ranges from near critical to utterly useless in value if given for free. And having a unit that even if they were free as utterly useless is quite a big blow. While you can't blame it entirely on the HPT since he can't really do anything about it, the reality is that this is the game HSR wants to be. Being a sustain by itself is balanced around being lower than a support or a DPS, which is an Achilles heel in the right matchup and investment threshold. But overall, the HPT was a really good free 5-star. While some people rightfully scoff him since some accounts really did just find him useless, most players, myself included, appreciated a break from the Hyoscene monopoly. We have to understand that free 5-stars are also not just for meta whales or for those with strict intention of just maining him. If you are a player that tackles the meta but not zero cycle it, the HPT is more than likely a much more key unit for your roster than Archer, who you might not have a sparkle for. Peter's team building restrictions are very lax, which allows him to be used in very high frequencies just out of habit and very little changes in your pull habits to make it happen. He's very cool. Next is Kafka. If you want to talk about an oppressive unit in your account, Kafka is the greatest example. Kafka was free in the 4.0 selector, as unbelievable as it sounds, after her 3.4 Nova Flare. Kafka is a specialist that focuses on detonation of DOT effects during your turn. Because DOT cannot deal damage directly on its own, Kafka will always be a massive increase for an account that has Black Swan or High Sealants in any capacity. With her Nova Flare, due to the sheer amount of attack she can do, she can very heavily shut down gimmicks that require attack frequency and enable your party at the same time. Because of how Kafka works, if you further invest into High Sealants or Black Swan, Kafka's detonations will only keep getting bigger, while Kafka herself is incredibly low investment, with tutorial being her only setup cost. Cut to 3 patches later, and DOT is an incredibly reliable 7 to 8 cost team that has surprisingly very few matchup issues even in Anom night stages, though they do start to fall behind at higher cost beyond 9 cost. They have started relying more on Eidolons like High Sealants as E1, but the matchup sometimes may not require it, and without the Kafka to complete the triad of girl bosses slowly poisoning you, this would not have been possible at all. However, Kafka isn't perfect either. Unfortunately, Kafka isn't like a Peter where you don't have to bend your pull plans for the HPT to work. Kafka needs you to bend over against the gambling table for you to get insane value out of her. In the same light, Peter for some people can be called utterly useless, and Kafka can be equally useless in the wrong roster. She will sit there in your account just as a temptation for you to pull the trigger on DOT if you ever want a new strong team. But Kafka has the strict advantage of never losing value no matter how much investment you're in if you're looking at her team. The HPT will get thrown out of a team the second a 5 non-main has started dipping into 3 cost, but Kafka is eternal on a DOT account. In my opinion, this puts Kafka ahead of Peter. In comparison to Archer and Dr. Ratio, your account will keep spinning without Archer in an Archer team with many alternatives like Phynon, Sparksy, and Zila, but DOT will not function without Kafka at all. So I think it's pretty easy to say that Kafka is the number 2 best free limited 5-star that HSR has ever given out. Before getting into the best free limited 5-star, how about we discuss units that would have been a part of this if the rules were less strict. The first honorable mention is RMC. This one is no-brainer. Remembrance MC would have actually been first if the rules weren't so strict. Great hyper carry buffer, excellent sustainless tools with mem and technique, sometimes good personal sub DPS damage if you really build for it, incredibly SP efficient but can also skill spam, many actions and hits, a unique action advance, and some good old crit buffs. What is there not to love? RMC is like Kafka, but you don't have to bend over to make them work. RMC is like the HPT, but even sustainless finds them useful. You can never go wrong with RMC, and the fact that EMC is so underwhelming in comparison means RMC casted such a large shadow over the meta. Oh, and did I mention possible infinite loops because that could happen somehow? That's what happens when you have an energy-reliant action advance gimmick. You can have an infinite power generator at some point if you cross that threshold. The second honorable mention is Welt. As a standard 5-star unit, Welt doesn't really count, but because he's a standard unit, Welt is the poster boy for scamming everyone out of cost because his E4 is absolutely not. Though Welt himself compared to many buffers is slightly worse, his unique strength has always been his ability to create better sustainless opportunities for you, much better than everyone else. In a turn-based game where dying is the worst DPS loss, you will gladly take a small hit to your DPS if it meant Welt can make you survive to the finish line. Of course, this means Welt in sustain teams are pretty underwhelming, annoying, but it's okay, I guess. The last honorable mention is Harmony MC. Again, we don't count MCs, but Harmony MC was released in a time where team building was a lot less strict and HP was much smaller. This led to a situation where HMC early on is considered a generalist because Super Break's numbers were so absurd. Yes, you can run Break Carry Silverwolf, you can run Break Carry Sushang, you can run Break Carry Luca, and even to this day, Break Himiko. The release of Fugue didn't stop HMC from being viable either, because Fugue's Exo Toughness racked up so much energy for the good old DDD spam. Even if Harmony MC was released during a time where the meta is much kinder, they are also surviving the meta right now because Break is kicking it and the DDD spam really never gets old no matter how much investment you have. If it weren't for the rules, HMC in terms of where they started and how they ended is one of the strongest, only matched by Kafka. I would also like to mention Ron, May, and Robin. They aren't bad, but I don't think they make the top 5. So, who is the best free 5-star in HSR so far? Drumroll please. Come on, come on. You already know it's Sparkle. Sparkle was released for free in a selector in 4.0 and just got her Nova Flare. This Nova Flare was completely absurd, giving a crit hyper carry buffer that already had an amazing SP economy, even more SP and even more QOL. The buffs were also a lot more generic to fill out key multipliers for not just Elation, but everyone else like Archer and later on Zila. And because of how easy it is to run Sparkle with very few team restrictions, most accounts already had a carry that Sparkle can buff incredibly well. Removing the idea that Archer is free, Zila was a 50-50 loss unit, Phynon is extremely popular, Sparksy was at her peak, and Sparkle also served as an Ashvale main DPS support. Even Evanescence is stainless, Welt main DPS, and due to the prevalence of the hypercarry archetype before 3.x, people that were playing before Amphorius had at least one DPS that could work with her like Acheron or Yun Li. Of course, these units are now rather outdated, but because Sparkle was able to be given for free, most of the player base has some use for her if their account was old, but also if their account was new. This also isn't fake flexibility, as Sparkle is genuinely the actual best in slot, and vertical investment on Sparkle can even move mountains such as this. Do you know how impressive this is? Unlike many of the units on this list, Sparkle has very few cases where she will be a negative, as displayed by the selector she was in also having Kafka. Kafka is just as important to her team as much as Sparkle is to her team, but Sparkle has way more teams, thus it was generally better advised to pick up Sparkle since it's so hard to go wrong with picking her. Sparkle's vertical investment on E2 is also incredibly strong for those wanting more, and she's already set for one of her teams getting another buff. If she's lucky, Sparkle will have another main DPS she can work with too. Her only real weakness as a free unit is that it's not exactly guaranteed Sparkle would be valuable. For example, if your account has a Mist free Archer, you're a Super Break and DOT investor, you have Mono Rem, or you know, the other teams in the game, there's more teams right now that are meta where Sparkle isn't a black hole where everything goes back to her like a wheelchair, which is good for the rest of the game honestly, and every unit if they were free suffers this fate anyway, so it's kind of a non-issue. So I think that's pretty clear and cut. Sparkle is the best free limited 5-star Star Rail has ever done. I hope you guys liked this video. This video has been cooking ever since I was sick and I'm glad it's finally out. Do all the algorithm stuff and I'll see you on maybe Friday? Sure, let's go with that. Bye bye.